so I haven't used
Oh, the desktop is
yet.
cool. All right, so people are here. So let's start, and we'll go for like 25, 27 minutes. It's so nice. All right, here we do our formal intro. Ready? And welcome to the Dean Obeidallah Show, also known as the Dean's Report Live. And everyone's joining. Thanks for joining us. And look who's here. Our friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army in JAG Corps, of course, has the YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers, known as Justice Matters, and his Substack is off the charts. Glenn Kirschner, Substack.com. Glenn, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining.
Great to be with you, Dean.
So Glenn, let's start with something. I mean, I love joking around and stuff, but it is a heavier day with the loss of Rob Reiner, who I knew a little bit. He came on my show. Last time he was on was a year ago. He used to come on more in the first time of Trump, but I know you were closer with him. You were texting with him. Even recently, you told me you had been texting with him at the Oath Keepers trial. So what's your reflections of Rob and the loss there?
Yeah, so courtesy of this crazy professional chapter 2 that I'm involved in, social media and running my mouth on TV previously, and Rob reached out to me years ago because, he was keenly interested in and plugged into all of Trump's abuses of the rule of law and the Constitution. And he reached out and we just started talking about kind of the legal front. And, I could tell him, answer questions for him about what's really going on the legal front, because there's so much propaganda that Trump and company spew into the public square. And we developed, I think it's fair to say, a friendship. So much so that after his father, Carl Reiner, who was yet another national treasure, there's a father and a son, both national treasures. When he passed away, Rob invited me to attend the memorial service for his dad. Now, that was during COVID, so it was virtual. And I am sitting there looking at, some of the world's most famous people, comedian directors on this, and they're all giving, their comments, their remembrances of his father, Carl Reiner. And I was just like a kid in the candy store watching all of these wonderful entertainers that I've, enjoyed for so many decades. And so, then there were a couple of other really kind of fun times that I got to spend with him. I would go on Stephanie Miller's Sexy Liberal tour with her. I'd go all around the country. I would jump up on stage toward the end and we would do a little legal block. And so I would be partnered with somebody in all of the different cities that we would go to. I was partnered with Mark Hamill and with Ron Perlman and with Adam Schiff and with Jamie Raskin and with Rob Reiner. So my wife and I got to kind of spend the evening with Rob and his wife waiting for us to go on. And then when we went on together, the first thing he did was made fun of me. And the first thing out of his mouth is, I want to go on record as saying, I have more hair than Glenn. And I'm like, I've just been insulted by a national treasure. I don't know how I feel about that. And Dean, I actually wrote a piece that I posted on Substack a few months ago, which was me taking my revenge months later on Rob Reiner for making fun of me on stage. It was really a tribute to Rob Reiner, which is, how I had such respect for him. So I was covering the Oath Keepers trial in D.C. and for MSNBC before I left the network. And in the testimony, one of the Oath Keepers had texted to another Oath Keeper, and this was now being read into the record by a witness. As the second Oath Keeper was on his way to attack the Capitol, the first Oath Keeper texted him, "Have fun storming the Capitol," which is one of the many famous, memorable lines from The Princess Bride. And I instantly stepped out and told Rob, I'm like, you're not going to believe it. One of your lines just made it into the Oath Keepers trial. He's like, really? Tell me about it. So I told him about it, and I think he was equally amused and horrified. But, these Oath Keepers, if you can't have a little fun with insurrection, what's the point?
I think that's great. I first met Rob. I was a guest on Joy Reid's show, her weekend show, not the evening show on membership Saturday, Sunday shows, AM Joy, I think it was called, AM Joy. And Rob was on. And Joy's like, do you want to be on with Rob Reiner? I'm like, do I want to be on Rob Reiner? He's like, one of my all-time, like, I love The Princess Bride. I can quote the entire Godfather movie, but Princess Bride is probably second. But like so to be on with him was a thrill. And of course, like, You Kill My Father, Not Prepared to Die. And it's still on cable all the time. When I watch it over and over, you see, never mess with death when there's a Sicilian involved. I'm half Sicilian. So that line there where he's debating over what to drink. So to me, Rob made so many movies that kind of my life. I could see the trajectory from Harry Met Sally Spinal Tap. I was like a kid, but I just happened to watch on cable again the original. But it was like Harry Met Sally was one of these defining movies, like a Woody Allen movie like Manhattan or Annie Hall to me. Like there's so much in it that others have borrowed and been informed by it. And also off not working, when he was not working like that, he was doing amazing work in terms of human rights for all, fighting for marriage equality, fighting for equal rights for people. This was a really good guy. And I remember chatting with him about what motivates him. And it was a sincere effort to try to change things. And I think through the arts on some level, but through direct activism as well. And that's the two paths that I try to do myself. You have one path, which is direct activism, like talking about things seriously. The other is using comedy, stand-up comedy or comedy festival or documentaries to try to tell the story. So it's a big loss. And the way, I mean, you're a former prosecutor, and I don't want to get into that case too much. We don't know much about it, but just the gruesomeness of it. And I'm sure you used to certain things, but it's hard to get out of my head. It's very disturbing. I find it truly disturbing.
Yeah, we had so many domestic violence murders that, it was one family member victimizing another family member. There's usually a documented history that tends to lead up to that. But I could tell you stories that I won't even share publicly because they're just too gruesome with what family members do to family members. But one last remembrance of Rob. So I told him that one of my all-time favorite movies, not just his, but all time, was A Few Good Men.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I said, given my background as an Army JAG, Rob, I said, you got so many things so right. And I was so impressed by that. And I think he really took that compliment to heart in the way he was responding. I said, but I do have a beef. My beef is you made the prosecutor, Kevin Bacon, kind of the flunky, the lapdog, the fall guy. And you made the defense attorney, Tom Cruise, the hero. Can you make a movie where the prosecutor is like the hero? And he laughed. But the prosecutor is never the hero in movies.
No, that's true. It's kind of funny. Like you root for the underdog, and it's always the defendant. And the defendant escapes justice or injustice. They still escape whatever they're going through, and then the audience cheers them. That's very interesting. And not to give it any credence, but before we started, you mentioned Donald Trump's response, and I'm not going to read it. If you haven't seen it, you can go read it. It is worse than you would want to imagine about Donald Trump. It reminds you that Donald Trump is evil, and that's the word. He's an evil person. He's nothing redeeming in him as a human being on any level. And the post he put about Rob Reiner and his wife and putting their names in it, just a level of despicableness.
Brought it on themselves, basically. He was dancing on their graves. That's what he was doing.
What a piece of human garbage Donald Trump is. This is the guy who mocked this Able report. I mean, we go through the whole, we get here. Anyone surprised you've not been paying attention? Anyone listening to this, you've been paying attention. You know how bad he is. I'm glad it's a reminder. There are even some on the right, a few on the right. I saw media stories who were like, what are you doing? He was killed by his son who actually had mental health issues. Why would you even bring yourself up? And he plugs America, and we're in the golden age now. I'm like, you look at the approval rating that you've got, buddy. You're slightly more popular than herpes. Like you're not in the golden age of anything. You're doing a horrible job. So his vileness is the cherry on the crap sundae for Trump. I mean, and Rob Reiner will go on being an American hero, an American iconic figure. And I hope Trump is remembered for how vile he is. I hope that's his defining characteristic.
He doesn't seem to have any human qualities. He is an example of humanity at its absolute worst. I'm not going to compare him to other dictators. I mean, he has kind of a unique kind of evil and obscenity about him, and not just in a sexual way, but he really represents, I think, the worst of humanity at this moment.
I agree. So let's shift gears. I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner to shift gears for a second to the DOJ. And it's really the incompetence there, or it's beyond incompetence, the maliciousness and incompetence together, what we're seeing. So we just saw that Trump's DOJ went to try to get an indictment of New York AG Tish James again. And to remind everyone, it was dismissed, and because Lindsay Halligan was not properly appointed as U.S. attorney. What I wanted to ask you, they went to two different counties. They went to Alexandria, and then they went to Norfolk, two different parts of Virginia. Can you share a little why they did it in two different parts? And are you surprised by the response in either place?
It's not inappropriate. There is sort of grand jury venues, so to speak, to be had in both of those places. They both fall within the Eastern District of Virginia. So they are under the same U.S. Attorney's Office. Maybe they were trying to get a grand jury pool that they thought would be slightly more inclined to indict, maybe slightly more. I mean, I don't even want to use the term pro-law enforcement because that's not what they're doing. They're vindictively pursuing Donald Trump's perceived enemies. So I don't know why. I do think it's intensely interesting that when they found an actual federal prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney, albeit from Missouri, and I'm going to talk about him in a minute. His name is Roger Keller, and I shouldn't use the term prosecutor. He's a civil attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Missouri. And there's an article in St. Louis Magazine where his colleagues were interviewed, and they said, you know what? He really wore his pro-Trump sentiments on his sleeve at work, and he's known to wear a red MAGA hat. They didn't say at work or off, but you know, this is not, in my 30 years as a Fed, I never knew the political leanings of the people I worked with because it didn't matter. It had no part in the work, the prosecutorial decisions we had to make. So they go out there and they get this guy, Roger Keller, who does largely civil work. And let me tell you, Dean, being a civil assistant United States attorney and being a criminal prosecutor with the DOJ, night and day. Don't ask me to go in and defend these big civil suits that are brought against the government. That's their job. That's Roger Keller's job. I don't know if he's competent at it or not, but take somebody from the civil practice and drop them in the middle of one of the most consequential criminal prosecutions ever. It's not a surprise that the man can't even get out of the grand jury with an indictment. But what I really want to know is now that we've had at least a assistant United States attorney who presumably knows the grand jury practice go in twice and fail to indict Letitia James. What in the hell did Lindsay Halligan do in that first grand jury to get an indictment out of those people? We already know because some of it was exposed in the Comey case. We know just how ill-equipped she was, how little she knew, how incompetent she was. She violated Comey's rights a couple of times over in the Comey grand jury, but we don't fully know what she did in the Letitia James grand jury. But the fringe benefit now, if they go in a fourth time and they come out with an indictment, then I'm quite confident a judge will order the transcripts and audio recordings of all four grand juries, and we will be able to see. And there's been some hint by Letitia James' attorney that they may now bring suit against the federal government, and that might be something we'd get in discovery anyway in a civil suit. So listen, I think both of these prosecutions are at this point, you know, dead in the water, and I'm not going to make a humorous reference to, you know, like what they're doing to Venezuelan, you know, boaters.
So Glenn, just so people understand, you know, you worked as a prosecutor for decades. How rare was it you would go to the grand jury and not come back with an indictment?
So I do something called the prosecutor's verdict, which is a former colleague of mine. His name is Kevin Flynn. He was a federal prosecutor for 35 years. I was one for 30 years. So together in our combined 65 years of experience, we had one. And he hastens to add, it was him who had it, not me. I never had it. He had it under circumstances that are understandable when he explains it. One in 65 years of combined prosecutorial experience, and they have now had, you know, well, they've had multiple in when Lindsay Halligan was involved and Roger Keller was involved. They had about a half a dozen in D.C. when Jeanine Pirro was involved. This is prosecutorial abuse, overreach, and misconduct insanity. That's what this is.
So when you look at it objectively from a lawyer's obligations, I mean, you're a former prosecutor, and I'm a lawyer myself. We have certain professional conduct rules that we have to adhere to, or we could be suspended, censured, or even disbarred. If a prosecutor is going in there and saying, look, we have memos saying you shouldn't be, there's no basis for this, they still go in, they lose 2 times. Is there a point that they keep doing this, that they're actually violating the rules of professional conduct and could be disciplined or even disbarred?
It's a great question. So I always hasten to make sure I include in my discussion of the prosecutorial abuse, overreach, and misconduct of Halligan and others, that it's not illegal to go back into a grand jury repeatedly. Usually we wouldn't do it more than a second time if the grand jury no-billed the first time. And Dean, the reason we would go back in a second time is ordinarily because we have learned more during the course of an ongoing investigation. Now we have additional evidence that we think can put us over the probable cause hurdle. However, Probable cause is proof down here. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest evidentiary burden known to man, is way the heck up here. We're not supposed to get an indictment, even if we have probable cause, unless we have a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits. That is a guilty verdict. And if we believe we can obtain and sustain on appeal a conviction. They don't have any hope of that because they can't even make out that low-level probable cause. And to answer your question, yes, there are ethical implications. These people will have to be referred to their own state bars for an ethics investigation. I think at some point, if prosecutors in bad faith just keep going back in and back in and back in to keep the pressure on Letitia James and keep her name, out there in the public, and they keep crapping all over her publicly, I think it becomes a due process violation at some point. And I think the Letitia James attorney could file a motion, and it might support a civil suit for civil rights violations, due process violations under the Fifth Amendment. So hold on tight, because that may be coming if they continue to go down this vindictive road.
When Trump first came to office, they were trying to do everything within a few days. Remember how fast everything was, appointing people, putting everything in? Things have slowed down now. So now we're watching the justice system protect itself by doing the right thing. I mean, ultimately, the Supreme Court might overturn it, but now we have Alina Habba out as U.S. attorney in New Jersey. She was Trump's former personal lawyer. You have Lindsay Halligan out as U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. What does that say to you? Like, how does it make you feel about the system in terms of protecting justice?
Makes me feel like the federal judges are holding strong. They are standing up to Donald Trump's lawlessness and unconstitutionality, and they're not being quiet about it. They are being vocal and sometimes scorched earth. When Trump appointed judges, say things like, the arguments being made by Trump and his administration are, quote, untethered to the facts. That's not the kind of stuff you often hear from federal court judges, especially involving the president that appointed her. That's a big shout out to federal court judge Karen Immergut, who wrote that. And another judge in Chicago said that Donald Trump is pouring fuel on a fire he started. So listen, the federal judiciary is holding strong, but everybody always yells at me, but the Supreme Court, Glenn, but the Supreme Court. I'm with you, but the Supreme Court. And if those six humps on the right don't recalibrate at some point and begin to show some loyalty to the express text of the Constitution with respect to this, wannabe dictator, well, they're cutting off their nose to spite their own face. So hopefully they will begin to actually have some regard for the rule of law and the Constitution.
Well, we can only hope. And that's the big backdrop for this administration. And it's why, in general, they're trying to, whatever internal discussions they had about, let's just ignore the orders. They're like, look, we're going to win the Supreme Court. So it's just a little delayed. But if the Supreme Court starts saying no to them, maybe we'll see them defy. And we did see right now there's a case pending with Kristi Noem, the puppy killer, who Judge Boasberg. And didn't you know Judge Boasberg? Is he the one you work with in DOJ?
I supervised him at the U.S. Attorney's Office when he was one of my homicide prosecutors, and I tried a horrible double homicide of a senior citizen brother-sister couple who were butchered in their own home. And you want to take the measure of a man or a woman? Try a volatile murder case with them. He is the best of the best, and I don't say that because of his position. I say that because I've seen his work up close and personal.
I'm going to ask you about Boasberg, but just a quick thing. Just as a human being, as doing prosecutions of cases that are that painful, domestic violence, family members killing each other, I invite people, if you've got the stomach, go read a website, lawandcrime.com. It's a Mediaite related to Dan Abrams. It's all legitimate cases. And I go to it a lot because I have Danny Savalas on Tuesdays and we talk about legal cases. Every day you read about people killing their children, a son killing a mother. The things with Rob Reiner is awful, but this is daily in America. And again, go to lawandcrime.com. I don't make any money from it. It's a free website. Check it out. The burnings, the horrificness of society that you see here in America. How do you process that? I mean, do you compartmentalize as your prosecuting? You don't go home with weighing you down?
Yeah, and I was raising 5 daughters at the time when I was chief of homicide and a homicide prosecutor. And I hasten to say this, but it really is a natural follow-on to what you said. We had cases in D.C. where children, infants, had their heads sawed off. They were decapitated on more than one occasion. And generally, it was a family member who did that. And, one of the things I had to do as chief of homicide is I was our office's point person on what was called the CHIT team, CHIT, Child Homicide Intervention
Oh my
Team.
God.
We had to sit around a table in the immediate aftermath of a child being murdered. And we would, among other things, have to look at the autopsy photos. And Dean, when I close my eyes, I can still see all of those autopsy photos and crime scene photos in my mind's eye. How you compartmentalize, I raised my kids and I reveled in being at their sporting events all weekend and all, and then I had to go into work and I had to deal with some of the worst of the worst. And you do the best you can, but if you're dedicated to the mission, and I was, and you realize you're there to help the families, the surviving family members, through the most difficult ordeal of their lives, that gives you great satisfaction and motivation. You compartmentalize as best you can.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and you serve in the military as well. What people see, I mean, you were in JAG, but still, what people see in war and have to come back to society and how it weighs on them. I don't, I have to hope that I would have been strong enough. I never have been called. I was never served in the military. And I always, at one point in my life, a few times actually, after 9/11, I thought about going to JAG because I was a lawyer then. And like, let me do something for the country. Instead, I'm like, let me be a comedian. That sounds like more fun, but I'm doing myself. I'm trying to help the country. So the last topic I want to touch on was Judge Boasberg and Kristi Noem potentially being held in contempt of court. The Court of Appeals has put like a slow, DC, 2 Trump judges put a hold on it now, but it's just a hold. Can you remind people what's happening there? Do you think she might be held in contempt of court?
Oh, I don't sleep on Judge Boasberg, because the case keeps going up to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and then 2 Trump-appointed judges will try to put a stop to it. They will appeal en banc to all of the judges, and a majority of the judges like, no, Judge Boasberg gets to conduct contempt hearings because there is at least probable cause to believe the Trump administration defied his orders to turn planes around that were carrying people who were being unconstitutionally deported and sent, of all places, to a terrorism prison in El Salvador, and they hadn't been convicted of a crime. Dean, by proxy, we're convicting these people. We're imprisoning these people in other countries, even though they've been convicted of no crime. That's insanity. So don't sleep on Judge Boasberg. 2 more judges, Judge Rao and Judge Walker. I've done a video about Judge Walker, and he really has just disqualified himself as a fair arbiter of the law, in my opinion. Now it's going to go en banc again, and the majority of the judges are going to say, well, please stop. Just let him conduct the hearings that he is entitled. In fact, that he, I would argue, is required to conduct. Because if you let the administration get away with defying federal court orders, well, then we really are done. Then we have no branches of government left as a check against executive branch lawlessness and abuse, because Congress ain't doing it. For gosh sakes, the judiciary has got to do it.
Yeah, and to remind people, Kristi Noem in court filings admitted, or probably bragged, to be blunt, she's the one that gave the order to send the planes to El Salvador while that court order already had been issued. So we have this dispute. Was there, I guess, the requisite intent to be some kind of contempt where you would punish her, or what is she going to? We'll see what she has to say about it. But so very last thing, the last 2 minutes here, Trump pardons Tina Peters. Tina Peters is in prison in Colorado for 9 years, folks, for tampering with voting machines to help Donald Trump. She was breaking in for all of Donald Trump. So over the weekend, he goes, I'm going to pardon her. And the AG of Colorado is like, I don't know what he's doing. So in the last 2 minutes here, can you tell us about how effective the pardon is of Donald Trump for state crimes?
Yeah, he's trying to do a couple of things. First of all, the pardon power does not extend to state court convictions. But he can still give her a prophylactic pardon and say, listen, if anybody tries to prosecute you federally in the future, here's your pardon. That's one thing he might be trying to accomplish. But Dean, we know what else he might be trying to pull. Get this bullshit pardon into the record, appeal it up to the Supreme Court, and then tell the Supreme Court, look, folks, you've rewritten the Constitution twice to help me out, to do a solid. Let's make it a hat trick, and let's just extend the presidential pardon power to state cases. not just federal cases, even though the Constitution expressly says it's only for offenses under the United States. So just do me another solid. Is there any reason to suspect that the 6, illegitimate Supreme Court justices won't consider rewriting the Constitution a third time?
And that's an excellent point. And that's the concern, because all you do is sit on the bench and do it. And that's why court reform, however you want to call it, packing, I don't care what word you use, has to be a priority for Democrats in 2028. Not the only priority, but one of the priorities in terms of protecting our republic and making it a case about preserving our democratic republic going forward. But I think affordability might be the big issue. Glenn, before I let you go, where can people follow you? Where's the best place? I know Justice Matters, your YouTube or on Substack. I check out your stuff all the time. I'm not even kidding. I checked it out last night.
No, I appreciate that. And I see you pop up, and I pop up on yours sometimes too. So, I'm on Substack almost every night at about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. We do a nightly community meeting. We've got a great community. I've seen some of the names popping up on your feed today. And we do rule of law reviews pretty much every day. We do a Q&A session where people can submit their questions during the day, and I try to get through all of them and then answer them in the evening at 8 p.m. on Sunday. And then I just started doing a once a week true crime thing where I tried more than 50 murder cases. I handled espionage and death penalty cases as an Army JAG. I handled RICO trials in DC. I got a lot of true crime stories to tell, and I enjoy telling them. So we've started doing that once a week, and last night was our first night. It looks like it's resonating with people. I try to show some crime scene photos and some clips of some documentaries that I actually have my own show on MSNBC called Capital Crimes with Glenn Kirschner.
Yeah.
One heck of a pilot episode.
I remember.
And then I fell out of my contract during COVID, which I was just as happy about because it was a lot of work doing my own true crime show. But so come on over to Substack. Everything is free. I don't put anything behind a paywall, I guess, except comments. Maybe you have to join and subscribe if you want to post comments. But all my content is free. So, yeah, you can go over to YouTube, Justice Matters. You can find me elsewhere. But come join our community meetings every evening on Substack. It's a heck of a lot of fun.
You're a one-man content machine. Glenn, the content machine. All right, Glenn, thank you, my friend. Thanks for everyone who joined. A lot of you, I'm stealing all of your people who watch your, now they're going to come over here. We'll see. No, thank you for everyone who joined. Really appreciate it. And all the comments, great stuff. Thanks, Glenn. Have a great day. Talk to you soon,
Thanks, Dean.
brother.
Good seeing you.
Nice